Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. Today we have an event that is representing a core issue for the media and for all journalists. It's about an article that has some issues over the last months or year. It's about retracting certain articles and confusion over it, and I wouldn't go into details because we have very limited time, and we have 3 speakers on the main table, and we have other speakers on the seat there, and I will introduce them. First, Mr. Yuichi Kaido, he's a lawyer. And he will start speaking. And then secondly, Mr. Satoshi Kamata, he's a journalist and also involved in this case. And thirdly, Mr. Tatsuro Hanada, he's professor at Waseda University in the Media and Journalist Studies. I have on the seat in the audience, Mr. Atsushi Yamada. He's a former journalist and from Asahi Shimbun. And also lawyer, Mr. Takatoshi Nakayama. Thank you for coming. And if time allows, they might be giving some speech. Each speaker will give some small, short presentation, and then followed by question and answer in the end. Maybe it will take about 35 minutes. And first, they would like to give a short statement about their case. Thank you for coming today. Please start.
私は弁護士の海渡と申します。長年にわたって原子力に関する訴訟を担当してまいりました。
Good afternoon. My name is Kaido. I am a lawyer who has been working for many long years on nuclear power plant issues and lawsuits on behalf of people on this issue.
今日私が用意してきたペーパーは声明の1というもので、これが中山先生と一緒に出した、この記事の取り消し、そして記者に対する懲戒処分の撤回を求める声明文でございます。
And so I have prepared a statement which is available in distribution in Japanese language today, together with fellow lawyer Mr. Nakayama, who is also here. And this is a statement calling for a withdrawal of the retraction of the article regarding the Yoshida testimony and also for the disciplining of the reporters involved.
この申し入れ書には200名の弁護士が賛同しております。
And we have submitted a letter on which around 200 lawyers from around Japan have signed on.
もう一つの資料が資料の2となっているものでございます。A3 版の裏表になっているものです。
And the second material I have distributed today has statement 2 or 声明2 written on the top in Japanese.
話を簡単にするために、この資料の2の方をご説明しますが、事件のポイントはこの記事のポイントは、命令違反の撤退というふうに大きな見出しが書かれたわけですが、その命令指示があったことは争いがないんですが、その指示が現場の作業員末端にまで伝わっていたかどうかということが大きな争点となっております。
And so I will not read out the full statement in regards to this, but the main point which is at issue, and in the article regarding the Yoshida testimony, there is not debate about whether there were actually instructions in place calling for the workers to withdraw. The headline of the article in concern had a very large headline saying withdrawal of the workers against orders, and this is the point which is of contention. However, the issue is not whether these instructions were actually given, but whether this was conveyed fully to the workers on site, whether they were actually aware of the fact that these instructions had been made.
で、この PRC の見解、朝日新聞の中の第三者機関である PRC の見解もこの指示があったことは認めていまして、その根拠として柏崎刈羽のメモというものと記者会見における報告というこの2つの証拠を挙げて指示があったというふうに認定しております。
And in the Press and Human Rights Committee, the third body organ of the Asahi Shimbun, the Asahi newspaper, the PRC itself also acknowledges the fact that these instructions were given, and this is given in 2 pieces of evidence. One is the memo from the time from the Kashiwazaki Kariwa nuclear power plant, and the second is materials which were distributed at a press conference on that day.
で柏崎刈羽メモは、重要部分をこの書面の中に、転記しておきました。この中の6時42分の欄を見ていただきますと、所長の発言として、校内の線量の低いエリアで退避すること、その後、本部で異常でないことを確認できたら戻ってきてもらうという明白な、指示の形で記載がされております。
And the contents of this Kashiwazaki Kariwa memo is included within the Japanese documents distributed today. And if we look at the timeline, there is a very clear recording of the comments or the words made by Yoshida plant manager at the time, which says very clearly instructions for temporary evacuation to be made in areas of low radiation levels surrounding the Fukushima Daiichi plant, and also for, once the situation was confirmed possible, for return to be done as soon as possible also. And this is clearly written within this memo.
また3月15日の朝8時半から行われた東電の記者会見で配布された資料、これを2番目の資料で添付しておきましたが、ここでは作業員たちは一時的に第一発電所の中の安全な場所に移動を開始したというふうにはっきり書かれています。この記者会見でもこれに反する説明、すなわち現実には第二発電所の方に650名が移動していたわけですが、そのことは一切説明されておりません。
And the second documentation which is included in this is the materials which were distributed at the press conference held by TEPCO on March the 15th morning. And within this, we can see very clearly, it says that instructions were given for the workers to temporarily evacuate to safe areas within the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. And this does not mention at all the reality of the facts that around 650 people actually moved to the Fukushima Daini plant at that time. This is not included anywhere within this press conference documents.
3ページ目に進みまして、3ページ目にファックスが3通上がっております。これは当日の6時台と7時半ごろに吉田所長が国保安院に対して送ったファックスでございます。細かい説明をすると混乱しますけれども、一旦第二発電所の方に撤退する計画があったものを撤回して、所内に退避する計画にした。しかしそれがもう一度撤回されて対策本部を第二に移転したということがこの3通のファックスからは分かります。
And I would like to draw your attention now to the third page of this document, which contains 3 different fax materials which are included. These are faxes which were sent in the early morning around 6 a.m. and then around 7:25 and so on from plant manager Yoshida to the NISA, to the government agency. And this very clearly says the instructions which he had given at the time, first talking about whether to evacuate to the Fukushima Daini plant or not, and seeing how this was withdrawn, and the plan being given to move to a safe area within the Fukushima Daiichi plant and so on. And this is very clearly written in the fax which was submitted by Yoshida himself.
で4ページ最後のご説明になりますが、PRC はですね、第一発電所内にとどまるという指示は合理性を欠いていたと、そのこと自身が、どういう理由か分かりませんけれども、第一発電所にとどまるという指示には、合理性が低かったんだという主張をしていますが、それも事実とは違うと私は考えます。すなわち、署員はすでに、免震重要棟の外に出てしまっていて、免震重要棟の周りは極めて高線量になっていたために、免震重要棟に戻ってくることは不可能になっていた。したがって署内の安全な場所で次の指示を待てというふうに言ったことには、一定の合理性があるというふうに私は考えております。
And the next point of information, which will be the final point, is on the 4th page of the document, which I've distributed today. And this is talking about the perspective or the judgment given by the PRC, the Press and Human Rights Committee of the Asahi Shimbun, which talks about the fact of whether the instructions actually considering the situation at the plant and so on were the most reasonable, logical instructions to be given at the time, considering the radiation levels and the high situation there. And I question whether the judgment of the PRC here is in fact correct, considering the situation of how it would be much safer to be waiting in an area nearby with low levels, as was in the instructions.
で最後になりますが、この日、の午前7時から午前11時頃までの4時間にわたっては、この原子力プラントについては主要な圧力や温度といった、データも計測できていない、全く対策ができない状態となっておりました。したがって、そして対策本部も第2発電所に移転されていたわけで、このまま多くの署員が戻れなければですね、この原発は制御不能になったというふうに考えられます。このような重要な事態が起きていたということを明らかにすることが、当初の朝日新聞の報道の眼目だったと思われてますけれども、この記事全体を取り消してしまったという朝日新聞の措置には私は理解することができません。
And the final point I would like to make is considering the fact that within the 4 hours of 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. on the morning of that day, there is no data in place now about the main pressure and temperature situation within the Fukushima Daiichi plant at that time. And this means that there were no measures in place to deal with the situation that was occurring there at this time. And also the central part of the headquarters and so on to control the situation had moved to Fukushima Dai-2 at this time, which meant that if they did not return, it would have been completely impossible to maintain control of the situation within the nuclear power plant. And so I believe that making clear how severe, how strict this situation or difficult the situation was the motivation of the Asahi Shimbun newspaper article at that time. And so to retract the entire article over this issue is something which I just cannot understand. Thank you.
Thank you. I forgot to introduce our interpreter, translator, Ms. Mary Joyce. Thank you for that. Now, Mr. Kamata-san.
Thank you. 私は、40年ほど前から原発反対とそれから原発反対の、レポートを、書いてきました。それで、しかし、福島の原発事故が、起こったものですから、反対運動を、もっと強力に始めようと思いまして、こちらでも、何度か、記者会見させていただいてますけど、さよなら原発1000万署名運動というのをやってまして、大江健三郎さんとか坂本龍一さんとか、沢地久江さんとかとで、こちらでやらせてもらっています。ありがとうございます。
Good afternoon. My name is Kamata Satoshi. I am a journalist who has been working, reporting on the dangers of nuclear power and in opposition to nuclear power for around 40 years now. Of course, unfortunately, we faced a tragic disaster here in Japan. So since then, I have been also working from here in Tokyo to start a movement against nuclear power also. And I've had the opportunity within this to hold several press conferences here at the FCCJ. I'm also one of the representatives of the Sayonara Genpatsu, the Sayonara nuclear power plant movement, together with, for example, Mr. Oe Kenzaburo and so on. And in that capacity, I've also had the chance to speak here several times in the past few years.
はい、今回の問題については私もフリーのジャーナリストとしてこの朝日新聞が全面撤回したことに対して大きな危機感を、持っています。それは、例えば自分で考えた場合でも自分の書いた記事が、間違いで全面撤回するというそういうことは本当に、一人の人生にとっても大きいし社会的な問題としても大きいしこれは本当に、事実をきちんと伝えて、この朝日新聞の誤りを、明らかにしたいというふうに思っています。
And as a freelance journalist, I believe that this issue is of great concern for all of us. And the fact that this article was in its entirety retracted is something which is a very critical issue for us to pay attention to. If I consider, for example, in my own position, if I would have to retract an article completely in such a way, this would have, of course, an enormous impact, not only personally, but also on society as a whole as well. And for this reason, I believe it's very important to make the facts known now and also to call attention to this wrong move of the Asahi Shimbun.
今回の問題は、政府自己長が調べた事実が全く秘密されていたのを、新聞記者が、引き出して発表したというところから始まっています。つまり秘密を暴露した記者は褒めたたえることが、あるべきであってもそれを全面撤回するということなどはありえないことです。
And the article which is of concern within this issue was made at a time when the government had not made public any of its official investigation documents and so on. And the journalist obtained through their own means these testimony and these documents and made this public through the article. And so the fact that this very important information which was made public by the journalist is now in this way, the entire article being retracted, is something which I think is a way to look at, pushing down or pressing down and putting pressure upon journalists who do make these kind of secret, important government documents public, and of something of great concern for journalism itself.
ましてご存知のように秘密保護法が始まったばかし始まる寸前に起こった事件でして、これが秘密保護法が施行されていたらありえなかった問題です。
And so, for example, if we consider the situation now where very recently the special secrecy law has just come into force here in Japan, and this incident or the article in concern was from before this time, but if we consider under the current law, this would not have been possible to make these facts open at all.
日本の原発は国策民営といいまして国家の方針として原発政策があります。今回の事件はこの朝日新聞の事件は政府が安倍首相がアンダーコントロールにあるといった原発の中の状態を混乱状態を記事化したスクープしたということから始まっています。つまり国家の秘密を明らかにしたということです。
And when we consider that nuclear power here in Japan is, or has for many years been put forward as a state policy together with the corporations involved, and when we see, for example, Prime Minister Abe saying that the situation at the nuclear power plant is under control, the fact that journalists can make a scoop and bring this kind of information to light, showing the real situation which was occurring within the power plant, is something, this scoop that was made is in fact actually making, state secrets known through the publication.
今回の不幸の問題は一つはその前に従軍慰安婦の問題で合法があったということと、それを批判した池上さんというコラムニストの記事を隠していた、ボツにしたという、そういうマイナス面と同時に3つ同時に社長が謝るという、それの力が加わったということが最も不幸なことでした。
And one of the very unfortunate things about this current situation as well is the apology which was made by the president of the Asahi Shimbun company was not only in regards to this article or this particular case, but also together with two other issues, one being the criticisms in regards to false information on the issue of comfort women in one of the Asahi Shimbun articles, and as well as this, also the cancellation of the columnist or column by one of their regular columnists and journalist, Ikegami Akira. So these 3 points were all together apologized for by the president in his press conference.
従軍慰安婦の問題はここでお話しする時間はありませんけど、これは実際あった問題でして、それは一部間違った記事があったということだけであって、それで全ての従軍慰安婦の問題を否定しようという力が加わっていたわけです。今度の問題も、その問題になったのは、つまり命令違反というたったその4文字だけの表現を解釈する違い、表現の解釈だけで記事を撤退するというジャーナリズムにとってはありえないことだったです。
And of course, there is not time to go into detail about the so-called comfort women issue today. However, the point to make there is that there was one part within one particular article which was seen to be false, and yet this is taken as denying the entire comfort women situation, the entire comfort women, what happened as in its entirety as the real issue. And this is exactly the same thing also when we look at the Yoshida testimony article as well. The point of concern is just these 4 kanji characters, the against orders, and yet because of these 4 characters, this is meaning that the whole article was retracted. And so this is an issue of very great concern for journalism itself.
これは海道弁護士の報告にもありましたけど、事実関係では誤報では全くないです。というのは、混乱期の中でコントロールができなくて、所長の、意思に反して、労働者が9割が、10キロ離れた第二原発にいてた。それを所長が後からそれでよかったんだというふうに追認してます。つまり、最高責任者が把握してない事実があった。それが非難でない 大使だというふうに言って後からそれでよかったというふうに追認してます。ということは所長のコントロールから離れていたということが事実であります。
And also, as Mr. Kaido mentioned before as well, we can see that the facts which are contained within the article are themselves not erroneous. The fact was whether it was an order or not, but the instructions which were given by plant manager Yoshida were not followed by 90% of the workers on place who moved to the Fukushima Daini location 10 kilometers away from where they were. And even if afterwards the plant manager can say that, well, maybe that was a good thing to do or something that he would not criticize, even despite that, the fact that this was going on at the time and the plant manager was not aware of it shows that the situation was not under the control of the person who was in complete management of the situation on site as well. And so we can see that this is an issue of great concern, whether there is debate about the particular terminology used.
この問題の根本は、大事故が発生しても社員は逃げなかったというそういう、社員の名誉を、強調することと、それからもう一つは、混乱状態であっても、逃げない社員がいたということによって原発事故自体を、相対化過小化するそういうふうな位置づけがあります。
And in the face of such a great disaster, well, saying that the staff, the workers, are emphasizing their honor by saying they did not run away from the site, for example, also serves to, in a way, minimize or try and put a minimizing lens on the vastness of what actually happened in the disaster as well, trying to play it down in a sense.
そして退避した中には、グループマネージャーという管理職課長部長クラスの責任者も一緒に入っていたということはこの、退避避難の重要な問題としてあります。
And one of the other points within the evacuation or withdrawal and so on was the fact that within the workers who did move to the other site was included the so-called group leaders or managers who were responsible for looking after or supervising entire groups within the plant as well. So these very key managerial positions and supervisors within the site were also within those who did evacuate.
つまり国策民営という政府の方針があって大事故があっても、ちゃんと、労働者が働いていたんだということを証明したい、というそういうのが、基地に対する猛然たる本当に信じられないほどの、攻撃が、始まったということです。
And so we can see that within the government policy of, the joint management as national policy together with the corporation and so on, is wanting to show the fact or wanting to show as if everything was functioning as according to plan at the time and so on. However, when we see the difference with the reality here, this is something which is very difficult to believe.
それで朝日新聞の中に PRC という、第三機関報道と人権委員会というのを作られましたけど、そこには、記者を尋問してますけど東電の社員たちは一切聞いてない。これは全く、客観的な機関としてはおかしいと思います。その、結論が、記事の、撤回を認めるという形になりまして、新聞社が自分で作った機関にその新聞社の、やったことを承認させるというそういうふうな、報道機関としては首をかしげたいようなことがあったと思います。
And in regards to the Press and Human Rights Committee, the PRC of the Asahi Shimbun, which is a third-party organ within the newspaper company, the questioning within this investigation was made of the reporters of the journals, but not of any of the TEPCO workers as well. And so I really question whether this is actually objective for such a third-party organ to be really looking into the facts without conducting such questioning. And the conclusion of the PRC was to go ahead with or retract the article in its entirety. But when we consider the fact that this organ, which was created by the newspaper, which then went actually to retract an article of the newspaper itself, is something which within the way that the structures of the newspaper should be and within the reporting is something very difficult to understand.
最後の一言ですけど今回の問題は、国家権力と報道機関という対立の中で、毅然と向かい合ってなかったあるいは、報道機関に対する攻撃の強さが、その国家の方針国策民営の原発推進という力と加わっていたんだということを、ぜひ、想像してほしいと思います。以上です。ありがとうございました。
And the final point I would like to make is that this situation very much highlights the tensions between the way journalism or the freedom of the press should be in relation to the state power and authority. And when we see this kind of situation where there is a state policy in place to promote nuclear power, and the way these kind of forces are at play in the situation which we are seeing in the Asahi Shimbun and giving into this pressure is something which I believe is very important for us to pay attention to. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we move to Mr. Hanada. Please give you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my honor to be here at the FCCJ for this conference. Speaking in front of you journalists, I'm very sure that all of you are observing this issue as a journalist. But I would like to remind you that you all are the tōjisha as well, which means persons concerned in Japanese. From now, I will express my opinions on the basis of this understanding. Now, I would like to use Japanese language, if you would allow me. Okay. 朝日新聞の吉田町長記事取り消し事件について、私は記事は取り消されるべきではなかった。そして記事を執筆した記者は処分されるべきではなかったというふうに考えます。これが結論です。理由を申し上げます。
So I would like to begin with my conclusion is that in the case of the retraction of the Asahi Shimbun article on the Yoshida testimony, the retraction of the article should not have occurred, and the reporters involved should also not have been disciplined. Now I would like to explain the reasons for this.
第一はジャーナリズムとは何か、ジャーナリズム調査報道とは何かという問題です。記事への批判はこれが記事でした。
And so first is in regards to what is journalism, what is investigative journalism, and this is the article in question here.
記事への批判はこの見出し、このヘッドライン、所長命令に違反、原発撤退というところに集中をしております。
And the criticism of the article is focused on the heading of the article, which is saying the defying orders or going against orders and evacuating.
そしてこの表現が間違っている、正確でない、吉田調書にはそのように書かれていない、誤報だというふうに批判をされています。
And this is being criticized as being erroneous, being the expression which is used is not accurate or that it is false reporting.
この点では批判をしてきた他のメディアの見方、それから記事取り消し記者会見での木村前社長の見方、そして見解書を出した PRC の見方に大きな違いはほとんどありません。
And in regards to this point, this particular criticism, there is not significant difference between the views or perspectives of other media, of the former president of the Asahi Shimbun, Mr. Kimura, and the apology which he gave, and also of the PRC, the Press and Human Rights Committee.
そこで調査ジャーナリズム、調査報道とは何かということです。
And so this brings us to what exactly is investigative journalism.
でこれは皆さんジャーナリストを前にしてですね、釈迦に説法ということになりますけれども、調査ジャーナリズムとは公権力や経済的社会的権力の活動を監視し、隠されている真実を明るみに出すという目的で、取材や資料で得たファクトに基づいてストーリーを組み立てて、読者に魅力的な作品をニュースとして提供することです。
And in regards to the definition of investigative journalism, and this is, well, of course, me explaining to a room full of journalists itself is perhaps not necessary, but looking at bringing or monitoring various social and political groups of authority and so on, bringing hidden facts to light, and based on facts and on evidence, building a story and presenting this in an appealing way to readers as news, as a appealing work as news.
ジャーナリストは何がニュースであるかを考え、その際に伝えるべきストーリーは何か、どのようなストーリーでファクトを伝えるのかを考えるものです。
And so journalists, of course, when they are considering what is news, are considering, well, what is the story that should be told here? And how do we present this based on the facts?
ファクトが裸のままでそこに存在していて、それを右から左へ伝えるということではないはずです。
And it is not, of course, just laying bare the facts and saying, one by one, laying out the facts in a row.
ファクトは語られることによって初めてファクトになります。ファクトをどのように語るのか、そのストーリーによって真実への接近が可能になるわけです。
And so facts, of course, themselves only become facts when they are told in this way. And so in the way that a story is formed and how this is done is what brings us closer to the truth.
この命令とか撤退はストーリーの一部です。
And so the words here, order or withdraw, they are part of this story.
命令でなくて指示であればいいんでしょうか。
And so if this did not say order but said instructions, would that have been all right?
また撤退ではなくて待機であれば問題がないんでしょうか。
And if it was not withdraw, but if it was be on standby, would that have been okay?
吉田所長が調書の中で使った言葉をそのまま使えばそれが正確であって誤報ではないと言えるんでしょうか。
And if the words which are used by Yoshida himself in his testimony are exactly used in the same way, the exact words, does that mean that the reporting would not have been false?
もしそうであるとすれば調書をそのまま新聞に印刷すればいいわけです。
And if that is the case, of course, then the Yoshida testimony should have just been printed word for word itself in the newspaper.
しかしそれを誰もジャーナリズムとは呼びません。
But of course, nobody would call that journalism.
記者の作ったストーリーが不在だからです。
This is because it lacks the story put in there by the reporter.
でまた調書自体も政府自己長から聴取をされている立場にある吉田氏が政府自己長に対して描いているストーリーだということを忘れてはなりません。
And of course, we must also not forget that the Yoshida testimony itself is the words used as part of the story which Mr. Yoshida himself was explaining as part of the government investigation.
これほど単純で明快なことが日本のメディアあるいはジャーナリズムでは理解されていないということに驚かざるを得ません。
And so it must be said that it is very surprising that such basic, clear facts are not understood within journalism in Japan.
もしもその記事のストーリーに異論があったり批判があるんであれば当該の記事が用いた同じファクトやソースあるいはそれ以上のファクトやソースを用いて別のストーリーを提出すればよいんです。
And of course, if there is criticism or a different view from the one which is presented in the article, then what should be done then is using facts and sources, the different story should be presented. A different view can also be put forward.
そして読者マーケットの前で競争すればいいんです。
And then this can be as part of the competition within the reader's market.
どのストーリーが最も真実に迫る魅力的なものであるのかは読者が判断します。また同業者もジャーナリストたちも判断するでしょう。
And in this case, which story is closer to the facts, which is more appealing, should be judged by the readers and also by fellow journalists.
第2はこの問題を処理する枠組みが間違っているということです。
And the second point is that the structure or the format which was used to deal with this situation was not the way it should have been.
木村前社長はこの問題を朝日新聞社報道と人権委員会 PRC に委ね PRC は木村前社長が記事を取り消した措置は妥当であったという見解を出しそれを受けて記者は処分されました。
And so in this case, former President Kimura gave or passed over the judgment in regards to this case to the PRC, the Press and Human Rights Committee, and they made the judgment that the retraction of the article was the correct path to follow, and as a result of this, the reporters and those involved were disciplined.
PRC とはもともと記事における人権侵害であるとか名誉毀損などの苦情を読者から受け付けて審議をし会社側に提言するための自主規制機関として設置されたものです。
And the PRC itself is a committee which was originally set up to deal with complaints for readers in regards to articles which might be violating human rights or which might have issues of dishonoring people or so on. And it was set up for this purpose, for dealing with claims from readers as a self-regulatory body.
ところが今回 PRC はあたかも前社長が起訴した案件を審理する社内法廷の機能を果たし、弁護人なしで有罪判決を出しました。
However, in the case of how this situation was dealt with within the PRC, it was almost as if the movements or what was done by the former president was brought to an internal court in a way, and without any form of legal defense, a guilty verdict was made.
これは PRC の変質であり、逸脱に他なりません。
And this is completely showing that the way that this was given to the PRC was a false way to deal with the situation.
本来ジャーナリズム上の問題は第一義的にはジャーナリストの職能集団自身が当事者として処理すべきものです。
First of all, articles or situations looking at this of evaluating the work of a journalist and so on should be done by peer bodies which are in place specifically for this purpose.
ところが日本にはその機能を担うべき仕組みがないのです。日本ではメディアおよびジャーナリズムにおいて会社原理、会社主義が強く、会社単位でコントロールされている。
However, in the case of Japan, such a body to fulfill those kind of functions does not actually exist, and the corporate involvement within media is very strong. So these kind of situations are dealt with within the particular company involved, rather than within a broader peer body and so on.
PRC も会社に設置をされ、いわゆる第三者機関も会社に設置をされ、その会社原理のもとに動いています。
And the PRC itself, of course, was also established by the company in question. And within this case was also, although being put forward as a third-party organ, was also completely done within the company itself.
日本にはジャーナリズム機関全体が担うプレスカウンシルもない。プロフェッションとしての職能組織団体もない。アメリカの AEJMC のようなジャーナリズム学会もない。プロフェッショナリズムを支えるべき仕組みがないんです。
And within Japan, there is no such, for example, press council or professional organization in place as a way to support journalists, such as would be in place in the US, for example.
で、記者クラブ制度がジャーナリズムにおけるプロフェッショナリズムの発展を阻害しています。
And the press club system in place in Japan is completely obstructing the development of professionalism within Japanese journalism.
以上です。
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insights and lessons about real journalism. We'd like to open the floor for questions and answers. Please raise your hand and proceed. And please let us know to whom you address your question. Thank you.
Linda Sieg from Reuters. I'm sorry, any of you who wish to, can answer to this, but I'd like clarification on 2 points and then a third, the basic question. One is, are you saying that the headline itself or the interpretation of whether the workers violated the order, that was a matter of interpretation, or that the Asahi article was in fact correct, number one. Number two, just to clarify, you're saying that even if there was one mistake in the article, the entire article should not have been retracted. Is that correct? And thirdly, and most important, in what form do you think that the pressure on Asahi to retract the article in its entirety came? Was it from its fellow media, the more conservative media? Was there direct pressure that you're aware of from government authorities? I'd like your opinion on your view on that point. Thank you.
ロイターのものです。2点ほど確認、そして3つ目が質問になるんですけれども、まず1つ目の見出しの方、見出しの件なんですけれども、その見出しをどういうふうに解釈するのかというのが問題でしょうか。それとも、その朝日の元々の記事が正しかったというふうに3人は解釈していますでしょうか。そして2つ目の方は確認なんですけれども、たとえ記事の中で一部間違いがあったとしても、その記事全体を取り消しにするということは間違っているというご意見でしょうか。そして3つ目の質問の方なんですけれども、朝日新聞には具体的にどういった圧力があったと思われますでしょうか。例えば他の、保守的なメディアからの圧力だったのか、直接的に政府の方から何か圧力がかかったのか、それについて教えていただけますでしょうか。これはどなたでも大丈夫です。
回答の方からお答えします。私個人としてはこの見出しそのものも正しいと思いますし、記事の中身にも間違っている点はないというふうに思います。ただ、一点誤解を招く可能性があるとすれば、すべての作業員に命令が行き渡っていたにもかかわらず、650名はその命令に故意に違反して、撤退したという事実はないと思います。しかし逆に言うと、吉田さんの直属の部下でその命令を聞きながらそれに反した行動を取った者はいたはずだというふうに私は思っています。それが誰かまでは分かっていませんけれども、それが私の事実の認定です。
First of all, my personal opinion, the headline itself and also the contents of the article, the original article, was correct, I believe. However, if there is one point which could be made, that perhaps a point which could be interpreted or sort of misleading or in a way could be whether this order did in fact actually reach all of the workers on site. And the way that the article was written could imply that all of the workers were aware of the fact that this order was in place. However, I think it must be said that while we do not know exact names or individuals, there were certainly people within these 650 people who did evacuate, who were aware or who did directly hear the orders or the instructions from Mr. Yoshida, and despite that did move to a different place. I believe that these people were certainly within this 650. However, we do not know the specific names involved.
いいですか。はい、私も、この記事は間違いがない、撤回する必要が全くないと思っています。どうしてこういう問題が発生したかというと、見出しが、強烈でインパクトを与えたということです。これに対して、いろんな新聞、週刊誌があらん限りの力で、批判しました。その圧力が強かったと思います。それで政府内部からは、どういうふうにしたか分かりません。ただ、この記者が、スクープした、調書が、他にもどんどんその後流されています。内閣の方から。ということが、この記事を打ち消すための、記事を書くようにという何らかの働きがあったんじゃないかということは、これは推測です。明らかなのは週刊誌、新聞、例えば産経新聞、読売新聞、それから、週刊誌、いくつかの週刊誌にこれは誤報であるという大キャンペーンが払えて、その圧力が強まったということです。ですから、間違いはないと思って、間違いない、正しかったと思っています。以上です。
First of all, in regards to both the heading and the article itself, I also believe that they were indeed correct and that there was no need at all for retraction. In regards to the question about the pressure, I believe that the fact that the headline was very strong impact in the words which were used, and very intense headline itself, did open up or lead to much criticism, very strong criticism from many of the other newspapers and also the weeklies and so on. And this criticism itself was actually overwhelming. It is not known whether there was any direct pressure from the government, but what we can say is that while the Asahi journalist made the scoop of bringing this Yoshida testimony to light at first, after this, the cabinet decided to make the documents public and encouraged other media also to write reports about these in a way that would criticize the original Asahi article as well. For example, the Sankei and the Yomiuri and some of the weeklies as well, there was a very strong concerted campaign to put pressure and criticizing the Asahi at this time, and this was what led to this situation.
Thank you. Next question, please. Yes, Thomas.
I'm Teddy Jimbo with the Video News. The newspapers always make mistakes. I mean, that's everywhere. And my question is this: why was this article in particular, or maybe Asahi in particular, is being under criticism, so much criticism for that one story? 新聞はメディアは必ず誤報はしょっちゅうすると思うんですけれども、なぜ、朝日新聞がこれだけ今回の記事で、叩かれたのか、もしくは、なぜこの記事がそれだけ、多くの批判を受けなければならなかったとお考えになるのか、どなたでも結構です。お願いします。
なぜこの記事が狙われたか いろんな説明解釈があり得るかと思います。で、日本のジャーナリズムは 3.11 において敗北しました。その時日本のジャーナリズムは何と言われたかって、30キロ圏内に会社の命令で撤退をしたっていうふうに批判されたわけです。ここでも命令と撤退という言葉が今回と同様に登場します。で、30キロ圏内の現地の中にはいわゆるマスメディアのジャーナリストはいなかった。で、そのことを南相馬市長の櫻井氏が証人として証言しています。で、彼は記者は逃げたって言ってます。逃げた。私はこの記事の中でどうして命令と撤退がこれほどこの言葉自体に批判が集中するのかは、おそらく深層心理的には今日のマスメディア企業の内部のジャーナリスト、あるいは記者クラブメディアのジャーナリストたちが 3.11 の時の受けた批判を思い出しているからじゃないのかなと思います。だから命令ではなくて指示であってほしいんです。撤退ではなくて退避であってほしいんです。それが私のこの記事に対するこれほど大きなマスメディアベースのジャーナリズムからの批判の理由ではないかと思っています。
First of all, in regards to why this article itself was targeted in this way, and of course there are various explanations and interpretations which could be possible, but I believe it is related to the failures of Japanese journalism at the time of the 3/11 disaster. Well, what do we know about what happened then? At the time, actually, there was company orders given for mass media within the 30-kilometer zone around the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant to evacuate, to withdraw. And there was great criticism at the time for this as well. The two words which we see reoccurring here, the order and the evacuation or withdrawal, are exactly the same as the words which are causing such great criticism at this time. At the time of the disaster in Fukushima, there was no mass media left within the 30-kilometer area of Fukushima, within the Japanese mass media. And Mayor Sakurai of Minamisoma city, right near the plant, in his testimony also says he uses the word ran, the media ran, when he talks about this situation. And so in this article, using these same words as well, why is it that this is the target of such criticism? And I believe that this is in some way psychologically, considering the internal process within, the press club journalists or the corporate media and so on. This reminds them of the criticism which was made at the time of 3/11 in regards to their company orders about withdrawing as well. And so they want it to be that this wasn't orders, this was instructions, or this was not evacuation, this was being on standby and so on. And I believe that this is perhaps one of the reasons that this particular article itself was the target of such heavy criticism from other media outlets.
この問題は原発事故はコントロールできるという問題と、社員は勇敢に戦うというそういう神話の実態を暴露したからです。そういうことはもうできないんだということをこの吉田証言が明らかにしたから、それに対して社員は頑張った、原発事故はコントロールできるという巻き返しが始まったということです。
And I would like to also add that in regards to the nuclear power plant disaster, this article brought to light or really destroyed two of the major myths surrounding the disaster. The first being that the situation can be under control, that it is possible to control what's happening within the nuclear power plant in the case of a disaster. And the next being the myth that was put around, well, so long as the workers are there and doing their best, then the situation is fine as well. And this article really brought to light the fact that these 2 points are missed and the real dangers of what happens in the case of a nuclear power plant disaster. And I believe that this is one of the reasons that it was targeted in such a way.
Next question, please. Yes.
ザ・プレスジャパンの桜井真由美と申します。よろしくお願いします。2問あって、1問目は海藤弁護士にお願いしたいんですが、この、要望書を出すにあたって、新聞労連の方に、ご意見は伺ったのでしょうかということですね。で、2問目は鎌田さんにお願いしたいんですが、次の過酷事故が起こった場合に、新聞メディアと、ジャーナリストは、どのような態度で臨みですね、どのような報道をすべきかということを別々に、ジャーナリストと新聞記者と別々にお伺いしたいと思っています。
I have two questions. The first is for Mr. Kaido. In the preparation of this statement or the letter which is put forward today, did you also seek opinion from the Newspaper Workers Union and so on in this case? And the second would be, if such a situation were to happen again, what kind of reporting would you like to see, or what kind of way should this situation be dealt with by the newspaper media and journalists?
まず第1番目の質問ですが、新聞労連の委員長、今日もこの場に来られてますけれども、もちろんこの話を、雑談のようにしたことはあると思いますが、この、弁護士の、呼びかけ文を作るときには、荒崎さんとは相談してないと思いますけれども、でも荒崎さん自身もこの声明の丸2の方の、賛同人のトップに上がってますんで、同じ、方向を向いてやってるというふうに思っております。
In regards to the first question about whether the Newspaper Workers Union was consulted, and the head of the committee is actually here with us today in the room, Mr. Arasaki. But actually, while this has been discussed in an informal way, in regards to this statement itself, it's written, or the letter is on behalf of the lawyers, and so in regards to the concrete contents of this, we did not consult. However, if we look at the second statement, which is distributed today, calling for the retraction of the article to be cancelled or withdrawn. Actually, the very first person listed within the people signing on to this statement is Mr. Arasaki himself.
原発事故に関しては、かつて、茨城県の東海村の JCO というところでも事故が発生しまして、被爆が発生しました。この時に記者たちも走っていったんですけど、ポケットベルで呼び返されたということが経験としてあります。ですから原発事故があった時に記者がどうするのかということは重大な問題で、どう取材したらいいのかはマニュアルはなかなか決められないんじゃないかと思います。問題はやっぱり原発の再稼働はやっぱりさせない。もう日本は、原発はできない、地盤とかいろんなこの国土の狭さとか地震とか火山とかあるから、もう原発は無理なんだということを徹底して、とにかく原発から少しでも早く撤退する、それを新聞社が力を入れてやっていくのが最大の記者の安全を図る方法だと思います。
In regards to the question about how journalism should function or how journalists should function in the case of a nuclear power plant disaster, well, of course, prior to Fukushima, we have also experienced the JCO disaster in Tokaimura in Ibaraki in Japan. And at this time, there was also the exposure to radiation and so on. At that time of the disaster, there were journalists who were running to the scene, however, were called back on their pages actually to withdraw, not to go to the scene at that time as well. And so, of course, it is very difficult to consider, well, what the media, what journalists should do in the case of a nuclear disaster. And it's very, well, near impossible to create a manual of how to function in such a case like that. However, the one thing which can be done to protect the safety of journalists is to make sure that the nuclear power plants here in Japan are not restarted. When we consider geographic reasons, the earthquakes and volcanoes, also other situations such as the population density and so on, we can see that it is really not safe for nuclear power to once again be restarted here in Japan. And so I think that what newspapers and journalists can do to ensure the safety of their reporters and their staff can be for newspapers to also work to ensure that Japan, as soon as possible, does move away from nuclear power.
Thank you. Albert?
Hello, I'm Albert Siegel from McClatchy. Just a general question. Are you suggesting that newspapers themselves should take the position of influencing, or rather attempting to even dictate to people national policy? I mean, shouldn't journalism in general, and I guess one of the complaints people have about journalism is, shouldn't journalism in general basically be to inform the public and allow them to make a decision as opposed to trying to influence the decision? That's it. Anyone?
はい、質問です。新聞の役割というのは、じゃあ、市民に対して何か影響を与えるですとか、こういう国の政策に何か影響を与えるということを新聞はやるべきなのでしょうか。それも本来でしたら、ジャーナリストの役割というのは、その社会に対して情報を提供して、それで一般市民が自分たちで判断して自分たちで決めるような情報を提供するというのは本来のジャーナリズムの在り方だと思うんですけれども、ジャーナリズム、そして新聞そのものはその市民に対して、そして政策に影響を与えるべきというふうに思われますでしょうか。どなたでも。
私、例えば原発に関しては、原発反対、原発はもう嫌だっていうのは、6割以上、7割、少なく見て7割以上あります。その声が、きちんと伝えて、やっぱり原発からは撤退していく、それが日本の国を安全にして、これからも発展させていくって道だってことは、それは客観的な事実として言えると思います。そういうふうに政策を変えていくというのも新聞の大きな役割だと思います。ですから、国家を監視するのと同時に、国家が間違っている方針はやっぱり変えていくっていう、そういうふうな任務を持っていると思います、ジャーナリストとしては。
In regards to the issue of nuclear power, I believe that when we look at, for example, surveys or polls of the population show that close to 70% of the population of Japan is against nuclear power or wanting to move away from nuclear power. So I believe that one of the roles of newspapers should be to ensure that this voice of the majority of citizens is fully reflected and shown within the reporting. And also when we consider how to make a safer country and allow for a future development as a country, I believe that as one of the objective fact, actually, the fact that the Japanese society is calling for moving in this decision, then the role of newspapers can be to shape policy in a way that reflects the will of its citizens. So I believe that the role of newspapers, at the same time as monitoring what the state is doing, if the state is doing something which does not go with what the citizens are calling for, with the direction, then I believe that it is appropriate for newspapers to influence policy in that way, to shape policy in that way.
Thank you. If I, yes, please.
フリーでやっております大と申します。今日当事者である朝日新聞のご出身の山さんがいらっしゃっているので、今日お話会見のですね感想と出身母体についてのお話話題になっているんですけれども、それについてご感想いただければと思います。
I am a freelance journalist, and because we actually have in the room Mr. Yamada Atsushi, who is a former journalist with the Asahi Shimbun, I would like to, as a final comment, ask if we can actually ask for a remark from Mr. Yamada about his thoughts on this issue.
Okay, maybe I ask him a question and he would answer. If I have the chance to ask last question, because we are approaching or reach the limit time. You know, after the disaster of Fukushima, there was kind of exodus from Japan. Most people ran away and companies moved to Osaka, and even the countries exporting Japanese products start to stop buying. Until now, there are a lot of countries don't buy food from Japan. And if the media started to report kind of casually about the radiations, that might really destroy a country's chances to stand up again. So don't you think that the government Japanese government was very wise to do what I call information management and try to control who's giving the information, because this is a nuclear disaster and nobody knows what is the fact really is. Maybe the radiation comes here now and then another spot after 1 hour. Nobody knows what is going on. It's a scientific issue, difficult to to grab, basically. So don't you think the government was basically good, and now the government even managed to get to host the Olympics? So maybe you should really thank the Japanese government for its policy in the information management. That's just not my opinion, but just I stand in the government position to ask this question. Thank you.
Is that for Mr. Yamada as well? で山田さんにぜひ先ほどの感想の件と、そして司会の方からも一つ質問させていただきたいと思います。でこれは最後になるんですけれども、原発事故が起きた直後にはですね、日本から多くの例えば外国人が海外に行ったりですとか、多くの関東の方にある会社が大阪また関西の方に移ったりですとか、あと日本のものを輸出していたような会社がもう輸出できなくなる。そして今でもまだ日本から食べ物など輸入していない国もたくさんあると思います。でもしメディアがこういう放射線の問題、そして原発の問題などをカジュアルに報道する、そして非常にその問題についてたくさん報道するのであれば、日本がまた復興できるチャンスをそれ壊してしまうことにつながるというふうに思われますでしょうか。そして日本の政府が当時も今も情報を管理するというのは、もちろん原発事故に関して本当に何が正しいのか何が事実なのかというのは誰もわからないような状況がずっと続いていたと思いますので、その政府がその情報を管理して、政府の方からだけの情報の提供、そして科学的なこととかもちろん変わることもありますので、政府がやったことというのは正しかったというふうに思いますでしょうか。それともそういったことによって、例えば東京にオリンピック招致できたということもありますので、政府のそういったやり方を評価すべきというふうに思いますでしょうか。それも含めて感想をお願いいたします。
Thank you very much to give me the opportunity to speak. 日本語でさせていただきます。私は朝日新聞でシニアスタッフライターを務めておりました山田敦と申します。
Good afternoon. My name is Yamada Atsushi, and I am a former senior staff writer of the Asahi Shimbun.
先ほどから朝日新聞の PRC の記事、判断と朝日新聞が下した記事の取り消しについて、スピーカーの方から厳しい意見が出ています。私もそれについては同感です。
And from the speakers today, we have heard very critical views about the judgment of the Asahi PRC and also of the retraction of the article, and I am in agreement with the views which were put forward today.
記事を書いた記者は、原発というのがひとたび事故が起きたときに収拾がつかなくなり、いくら冷静な指導者がいてもその指示命令が伝わらないという大混乱が起きるということを記事にしたものです。
And the reporters who were responsible for writing this article are bringing light to the fact that in the case of a nuclear power plant disaster, even with having calm leaders in place, the confusion of the situation means that these orders do not reach those who should. Or, for example, what should happen cannot happen in the confusion and the situation surrounding such a severe disaster.
そのことが現場の労働者の名誉を汚すとか、それとも原発を反対するとかっていうことを超えて、事実を書く。原発が事故を起こしたときに何が起きるのかということが、隠された資料の中でそれを表に出すということが、記者の使命だと私は考えています。
And so while there may be discussion about whether this, dishonors the workers, the TEPCO workers, for example, or goes against or is trying to go against policy or so on, I believe that really what this article did and really fits with the mission of journalists is bringing to light what happens, what really was happening in such a situation as the Fukushima disaster, and also making public information which at that time was still within hidden documents.
ただこの事実が暴露されることを面白く思わない人たちがいることも事実だと思います。
However, it is of course also reality that there are people who are not happy for such facts to be made public.
今の日本の現状を考えるときに、原子力発電所を再稼働するか、あるいは日本の歴史をどのように認識するか、あるいは日本の憲法をどういうふうに考えるか、それぞれ別の問題なんですけども、日本の大きなものの考え方のぶつかり合いが、このような問題をめぐって、右と左に大きく分かれている現状があります。
And when we consider the contemporary situation here in Japan on the issues, for example, of whether to restart nuclear power plants or not, how we recognize or how we interpret and look at Japan's history, or also how we view the constitution, of course, these are different issues. But the situation, the reality here in Japan at the moment is that clashes in these views are very much polarizing between left and right in society now.
そして残念なことにジャーナリズム自体が政府に非常に近いジャーナリズムと政府を監視していこうというジャーナリズムに二極化しようとしているのではないかと思うような現状があります。
And I believe that similarly, and in a very unfortunate situation, we are now seeing within journalism in Japan itself also a real polarization with that media which is very close to the government and media which sees as its role monitoring the government.
これは単にジャーナリズムの問題というだけでなく、新聞企業、情報コングロマリットとしての、メディアの在り方自体が、ビジネスとも絡んで大きく揺らいでいるという現状と無縁ではないと私は考えています。
And this is an issue, of course, not only of journalism, but also when we look at the newspaper companies or the information conglomerates as well, and how the role or the involvement of business is here also very connected, I believe.
そしてこの吉田調書の問題はそれだけで語れません。先ほどどなたかが言われてましたが、その前に起きた慰安婦報道問題の誤り、あるいはそれをめぐる池上さんのコラムの不掲載の問題、こういう問題に朝日新聞がさらされ、朝日新聞が極めて厳しい立場に立たされている中で起きた事件です。
And of course, there is much more to the issue surrounding the Yoshida testimony and the article of concern here also as well. As was mentioned before, this is also very much connected with the criticisms over the reporting or the false reporting on the comfort women issue, and also for the not publishing Ikegami Akira's article or column as well. And so the Asahi was subject to very strong criticism on all of these points in a very concerted way.
その中で本来この吉田調書の問題だけでしたら、朝日新聞はこのような誤りを犯さなかったのではないかと私は思います。
And I believe that if it had only been the sole issue of the Yoshida testimony, then the Asahi Shimbun would not have taken such a false way of dealing with the situation.
しかし、慰安婦問題での検証記事の際の報道の仕方、あるいは池上調書の池上コラムの不掲載ということで、朝日の経営者は極めて不安定な立場に立って、むしろ責任を問われるような状況にありました。
But when we consider that this, together with the issue of the verification of the Comfort Women article, or also the Ikegami column issue as well, and the way this was reported from other media as well, meant that the managers or the business managers of the Asahi Shimbun were really put in a very difficult, unstable position as well, which led to this situation.
その中で、朝日新聞の経営陣は自分たちが一番関与が薄かったこの吉田調書のことで世間に詫びることで他の問題を一緒くたに処理しようとしたのです。それが私の見立てです。
And my perspective on this is that the Asahi Shimbun managers actually, by bringing the Yoshida testimony article to the fore and making the very public apology about this and dealing with the other issues at the same time, was perhaps the easiest way for it to go forward, to make an apology and deal with the two other situations at the same time as well.
日本のものの主張、いろいろものの考え方でかなり朝日新聞のようなリベラルの報道に対して強い風当たりがあるのは事実です。
And there is definitely a reality at the moment that there is very strong pressure against such liberal media as the Asahi Shimbun in Japan at the moment.
しかしそういうふうな、風当たりの中でちょっとしたミスで、経営者が腰砕けになった。それが今回の誤りにつながったのではないかと私は考えます。
However, I believe that in the face of such difficult winds, shall we say, that the managers of the Asahi Shimbun, on such a small issue, or what could be seen as a small mistake or interpretation and so on, went to such extents of apologizing and going so far as retracting also is something which is very unfortunate in this case.
週刊誌をはじめ新聞もそうです。さまざまなメディアに袋叩きされることによって、販売部数が減るとか、広告主に働きかけて広告を取りやめるとかっていう強い圧力が働いていました。
And at that time, with the severe criticism from the weeklies or other newspapers or all media and so on, the managers at the newspaper were under great pressure of, for example, concerns of sales dropping severely or also advertisers cancelling their contracts and so on.
そのような経営危機を乗り越えるために、ここで謝らなければいけない。その謝る口実を吉田調書に見出して、撤退を図ったのが今回の、事件だと思います。
And I believe to overcome these difficulties and from the business perspective as well, they needed to apologize for something. And for this reason, the Yoshida testimony article was used as an excuse, and that is at the base of what happened this time.
第一線で一生懸命、調査報道に取り掛かっていた記者が犠牲になった。その生贄になったということは極めて情けない事態だと私は思います。
And the fact that such dedicated investigative journalists were sacrificed as a result of this is something which I believe is very shameful.
これは朝日新聞のガバナンスにも問題があったと思います。
And I believe there was also problems with the governance at the Asahi Shimbun.
PRC という本来は、取材された側の人たちの人権を守る機関が記者の冤罪を作り出すという機関になったということは非常に残念だと思います。
And the PRC, which was supposed to be set up to deal with human rights violations of people interviewed for stories, for example, or reported about, the fact that it was used instead to create false guilt of the journalist is something which I believe is not acceptable.
朝日新聞は今回の反省を踏まえて経営陣が変わりました。
And based on the regret of this incident, the managers or the top staff at the Asahi Shimbun changed.
新しい経営陣がこれまでの経営陣の誤りを正し、きちんとしたジャーナリズムの本道に立ち返ってくれることを私は望んでいます。
And I very much hope that this new managerial staff will correct the mistakes that their predecessors made and bring the Asahi back onto the path that it should be on of real journalism.
先ほどの質問に答えさせていただきたいと思います。
And so to briefly answer your question.
確かに原子力事故の細かい報道を行っていくということは日本に対して不信を高めていくことにつながることもあり得ると思います。
And I believe, of course, making very detailed reporting about the problems of nuclear power and so on could connect to difficulties for Japan, as you mentioned.
しかし何か隠しているのではないかと疑われるよりも今確認される事実を明らかにする方が世の中の信頼を回復するのに重要だと思います。
However, I believe that rather than having doubts about whether anything is being hidden, what would really build more confidence in Japan would be to make all facts which are available public.
残念ながら今の政府や電力会社は都合の悪いことは隠したがる傾向がまだ抜けません。
Unfortunately, the current government and also the utility companies still have a tendency to hide things which are not in their favor.
であるがゆえに、これからも調査報道は必要です。
And this is why investigative journalism is more important than ever from now.
日本の報道を見てれば真実がわかるという信頼が世界に伝わることが日本の安全を考える上で一番大事なことだと私は思います。
And I believe that the most important thing for considering Japan's safety and security from now is to have people around the world confident that when they look at Japanese reporting, Japanese journalism, they can be confident that they are seeing the truth.
ただ原子力の、被害は馴染みがないこともあって、現場の福島でさえ正しく恐れるということが難しい状況になっていると思います。
However, in the case of nuclear power, of course, this is something very difficult when we're looking at the impacts of nuclear power. And even in Fukushima, there is still the issue about how to be correctly scared, shall we say.
非常に残念なことですが、事故が起こった以上、この事故という現状を正面から見据えて何が怖いのか何は安全なのかということを皆が考え世界でも共有していくことがこれから大事なことだと私は思います。
And unfortunately, of course, the nuclear disaster is reality here in Japan. And so we need to really look it in the face directly and look at what the situation is, what it is that we should be concerned about, and make sure that this is shared with the world also.
Thank you very much.
Very much for your insights, and this wraps up our event. It's very sorry I don't know. Is it okay to extend 5 minutes? Sorry, we have other event and we have to prepare the room. I'm very sorry I cannot because of instructions from the management of the club. Maybe some other time because the issue of Asahi seems to be going on forever. Maybe so. We hope things will be better in the future. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming, and please give more very good clap for the guest. Have a nice evening. Thanks.